The next handler we're going to look at is the async handler. The async handler simply give you a little performance advantage. If you use the regular handlers or the file handlers, each time your JBoss EAP sends some log events with the application or some of the subsystem, you need to wait, or it'll be blocked until it gets written to the file system. Part of the log entries, each log entry written to the file system will be blocking and waiting. But with the async handler, what it gives you, it's a buffer, as you can see here, queue length. So it gives you a buffer. So whereas your log events the application doesn't have to wait for the log events to get written to the file system. Rather, they send it to this async handler, and it will buffer it so they can continue doing its job. And behind the scene, this async handler will be using one of the sub handler, which is actually other handlers, basically a file handler, to write to the file itself. So between the application or the EAP server and the log events writing to a file, in between that you have simply a buffer or asynchronous handler right in the front. So that's all is actually an asynchronous handlers provide. So let's take a look at how we configure this async handler. So in the management console profile part of your logging under the handler async, you can click on add. I call it async here. And then log level info, I can specify this buffer length, by default saying 512. And then overflow action here, it says block or discard. So if this buffer is actually filled up, does it actually block the client or the EAP server from writing the log events? Or does it discard any logs? So you don't want to necessarily discard your logs. So based on your how often the log events being produced in your environment, you can actually increase this buffer length size so it doesn't actually have to block it. So you specify enough buffer, though it's not really a blocking happening. So if it's blocking, it's just if you specify a very small buffer length, then it'll be blocking quite often. So you don't really get the advantage from this async handler. So increase the size, again, is going to use your heap usage. So keep in mind, based on the buffer, it's actually going to use your EAP system heap. So let me just save this file, the async handler, and then I need to configure a sub handler that basically when this grab this log events, where it is actually going to send it to, and here by clicking on add here, I can able to send it to one of the other handlers. So here I call it file by size, which I just created. So it uses that one. Click save here. So that will actually create the async handler. And here is actually how it looked like in the configuration file. Let me look at the configuration here. So here's your async handler, part of the subsystem, logging, async handler, level info level, queue length, and sub handler file by size. So the sub handler is actually being predefined, which we did it part of the previous demo. When you look at the size rotating file handler, call it file by size. So that's actually the handler name right here. So that is the async handler. Now the other handlers that you can configure is the custom handlers. That's beyond the scope of this course, but you can configure them if you like. Typically, if you want to send the log events to JMS message queue, SNMP messages, SNMP managers, if you want to send it to, or syslogs, if you want to syslogs, you can configure that part of the custom. You can find those information in the documentation, part of the EAP6.